Hello everyone, happy Wednesday. Welcome to Within the Frame, where we delve deeper into the top stories taking place not only in South Korea but across the globe. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. North Korea too celebrated Lunar New Year holiday, but again without leader Kim Jong-un appearing in public or delivering any messages to South Korea or the United States. Pundits are speculating whether Kim is putting all his efforts into preparing for a military parade, as satellite images show drills, rehearsals, and an unidentified object which is assumed to be new strategic weapon. The date is expected to be February 8th, which marks the 75th anniversary of the founding of the Korean People's Army. How the North Korean people have celebrated the Lunar New Year holiday, and what is North Korean leader Kim Jong-un up to? For an in-depth analysis on North Korea, which is close but feels far away, we invited Doctor Go Myong-hyun, Senior Fellow from Asan Institute for Policy Studies, to the studio. Dr. Go, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
And we also have Michiel Hueben, Dutch member of European Parliament, on the line through Skype from Brussels. Mr. Hueben, welcome and thank you for your time.
Pleasure.
All right, first question to you, Dr. Go. South Koreans celebrated Lunar New Year holiday over the weekend, and North Koreans did so as well. But how do North Koreans celebrate the Lunar New Year holiday? Is there any difference?
So there's actually a very clear contrast between South Korea and North Korea when it comes to celebrating the lunar calendar. In case of South Korea, Lunar New Year is a major holiday because the South Korea follows the tradition, the historical tradition of celebrating the Lunar New Year more than the actual New Year. But in North Korea is, in a sense, they try to reject the tradition in the days back to like centuries in Korea, and they instead celebrate the calendar New Year rather than the Lunar New Year. So in terms of days of taken off from the calendar, meaning taking rest, the New Year, apparently they take 2 or 3 days off, but when it comes to Lunar New Year, it's just 1 day. So, but then still they attribute some meaning to it. For instance, it is said that the North Korean households, they try to have a special meal on that day because they believe having a special meal on that day is a good sign that they're going to continue to have good meals for the rest of the year. Another reason why North Koreans have difficulties having celebrate puts less meaning in the Lunar New Year is that it falls very close to, or usually falls very close to the birthday of Kim Jong-un, the previous North Korean leader, who was born on February 16th. So there's a slight overlap in terms of time. So that's another reason why North Koreans put less weight on the Lunar New Year.
Right, you have already brought up the issue of birthdays, but like you said, some say the Lunar New Year holiday is less important than birth anniversaries of previous leaders of Kim Jong-il and his father, Kim Jong-il, and his grandfather, Kim Il-sung. But how is it different in the way that they celebrate?
So first of all, the North Korean society is a highly politicized society. The ideology has the priority over other factors in the country. And especially when it comes to comparing the ideology, the priority of the supremacy of ideology to the tradition in North Korea, the North Korean leadership tends to reject the historical traditions in North Korea as being backward and as well as reactionary. That's how they put it, because it represents the class and oppression by the higher class people and the lower class people. So they instead emphasize the new types of tradition, which actually derives from the ideology of Juche, where the Kim family, the Kim dynasty, sits supreme. And so in that sense, they try to reinvent even the concept of nation. So contrast to South Korea, in North Korea, it is said that the Korean nation starts from Kim Il-sung, the founder of North Korea itself. So that's the reason why there's a more emphasis and celebrations when it comes to birth anniversaries of Kim Il-sung, and then the next leader of North, the leader that followed Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il. So in that sense, I think it's very, the Lunar New Year is, in that sense, it's actually put in the back burner, and then they celebrate the birthdays of the leaders because that actually represents North Korea as an ideological entity.
Right, interesting. Now, Mr. Hueben, North Korea leader Kim Jong-un has not been seen in public ever since he paid tribute to the regime's previous leaders at the Kumsusan Palace of the Sun. And unlike last year, he was not even seen watching music performances during Lunar New Year holiday. Now, many say he is waiting for a big occasion to make his next appearance, but what is your take on this?
Well, last year, Kim Jong-un gave a speech in September where he stated to further develop his nuclear weapons, never to give them up, and reject any talks on nuclear weapons. North Korea is always very calculative on when to escalate, when to de-escalate, when to ease tensions, when to ramp up tensions. So this could mean either two things, that either Kim Jong-un is now laying low for a little while in order to make indeed to come up in a big day, to make as much impact as possible, and to escalate tensions again. Or maybe he's waiting for a window of opportunity to have some talks, not on nuclear weapons, but maybe on some other things. But I'm afraid it's the first and not the latter.
Right, so he is being very calculative right now. But according to 38 North, commercial satellite imagery from January 21st shows extensive parade preparations being underway, including drills and rehearsals in Kim Il-sung Square and at Beating Parade Training Ground. There's also speculation that new strategic weapons could be unveiled, and most pundits speculate the parade is going to be on February 8th. But what are your thoughts, and what could we expect to see? I mean, should we even expect a seventh nuclear test as well? Mr. Huevin.
I saw the report by 38 North, and yes, indeed, they are preparing quite extensively for a new parade. It could be the anniversary of the Korean People's Army, but also the day of the Shining Star is coming up. So there are certain things that we can expect. Sometimes these parades are used to show new kinds of weapons. Sometimes they are just used to have bombastic festivities for internal purposes. But a seventh nuclear test is speculated for a long time, which would also explain that North Korea is now being a bit more quiet to make as much impact as possible.
Right. Now, Dr. Go, shifting gears a little bit to the international politics, the U.S. on Friday released images that appear to show North Korea exporting weapons to Russia paramilitary group, the Wagner Group, late last year. Now, until now, North Korea has been denying such claims, but with the images now unveiled, how would North Korea react to it?
So I think North Koreans will still deny the fact that they are supplying weapon systems to Russia. The part of reasons why the evidence presented by the United States government is not conclusive, in the sense that there's been some transfer of cargo taking place from being moved from a warehouse to a train, a rail car that was loaded and then sent to the Russian border. But then we don't know exactly the content of that cargo. So I think that gives a plausible ground for the North Korean government to deny that the weapons assistance is taking place. But then I think the United States government is saying this because they have other corroborating evidences that they cannot disclose to the public right at the moment because they need to protect the source of intelligence. And I think that in that sense, I think the North Koreans will continue to deny. But then there's a little doubt that the Russians are probably getting help from North Korea. I think, but then we have to wait until we actually see weapons made in North Korea found in the Ukrainian front. I think it's going to be a matter of time before the Ukrainian government will be able to capture putatively North Korean weapons and they demonstrate that there's assistance from North Korea taking place.
Right, so we'll have to wait and see, but North Korea would still deny because it's not conclusive. Mr. Huevin, while showing the images, the spokesperson for the White House's Security Council, John Kirby, he said that the arms transfers from North Korea is a clear violation against United Nations Security Council sanctions. Now, what kind of sanctions does international community need to come up with to be more effective?
Well, since the start of the Ukraine war, since Russia invaded Ukraine, we see an increasing in what I call blockization in geopolitics. So the world becoming ever more divided between, on the one hand, the Western countries, fully connected to the global economy, free trade, aligning sanctions. We have isolated despotic regimes, Iran, Syria, Belarus, Cuba, Venezuela, and North Korea. And you have countries in the middle. And these countries in the middle, they trade with the West, but also with these more isolated countries, a bit more under the radar. But Russia is now becoming part of these isolated despotic regimes. So what we see is now that North Korea is providing arms to Russia in order to propagate its own war. And Russia can provide North Korea also all sorts of things, fuel, other commodities to keep its economy going. So both countries have an interest in having closer relations. Now, that's also the downside of sanctions. You cannot, you can sanction a country, but it's very difficult to change the behavior of a very despotic regime, and you actually embolden its relations. So, yeah, in terms of sanctions, I think only secondary sanctions, so that when countries still trade with Russia or trade with North Korea, you would also sanction these countries. But whether that's in the interest of the Western bloc is actually a whole different question.
Right, so direct sanctions could not be very effective, but rather using secondary sanctions could be more effective in dealing with this kind of situation. Dr. Go, according to the financial tracking service by UN Humanitarian Office on Sunday, North Korea saw a significant decline in humanitarian assistance from the international community last year, just 1.9% of an amount from Kim Jong-un's first year in charge. Now, why is this, and how would this affect North Korea's situation?
So I think the reason why the amount of financial contribution to assistance programs to North Korea has decreased drastically compared to, say, the previous year, 2021. I think the numbers that are being published indicates that the last year, the total amount of financial aid assistance given to UN agencies that are working with North Korea was just $1.7 million, and only 3 countries that contributed to this. There was Switzerland and Sweden and Norway. So I think the reason why this is happening is because of COVID-19, North Korea asked and actually forced many foreigners, which include many UN agencies, employees based in North Korea, to leave the country. So I think the donors are primarily concerned about monitoring. So one of the major factors that they act as a barrier to increasing aid to North Korea is the fear of diversion of aid to others or other types of consumers, such as military and the government, and away from the vulnerable groups for which these aids are originally intended. So the lack of difficulties in monitoring, I think, is one of the concerns that has prevented the donors from increasing the aid. Another reason is clearly the war in Ukraine. I think we have to understand that most of the countries that contribute to this fund that allows assistance to North Korea are European countries. Right. But then there's a war taking place at their doorstep, namely Ukraine. And I think most of the focus of international assistance have focused on the near neighbors of Ukraine rather than faraway countries such as North Korea. So I think these are 2 major factors why the assistance, financial assistance in North Korea has decreased last year compared to previous years.
Right. Dr. Go actually pointed out this, but Mr. Huevin, most of the countries that provided North Korea with assistance were European countries like Switzerland and Sweden, like Dr. Go said. But how are European countries considering such moves, and what are their thoughts on North Korea?
Well, in the EU, North Korea is not that much on the country's radar. As was said, we have the war in Ukraine, and that's high on the agenda. North Korea is a bit further away for many EU leaders and politicians. And because of COVID, barely any aid goes into North Korea. This week, we actually had a debate in the European Parliament with the European Commission, the European External Action Service, where I called on member states to reach out to North Korea in order to provide aid to the people, to provide vaccines to the people because of the COVID pandemic. But next to that, I think that through aid, trying to provide North Koreans with aid, try to reach out to North Korean diplomats, we can also try and initiate dialogue, maybe set up working level negotiations, talks, track 2 diplomacy, because we need to talk to North Korea, not only to de-escalate, but also for the people, because, well, we need to help the people in North Korea. They never asked for this regime, and I think they're facing quite some hardships right now.
Right. Now, Dr. Go, After the position being vacant for 6 years, U.S. President Joe Biden finally nominated Julie Turner as Special Envoy on North Korean human rights issues. And given the long vacancy, the nomination could provoke a backlash from Pyongyang. How do you believe North Korea will react, and why was this position vacant for so long?
Absolutely. I think this is, first of all, it's a very good news. I think this position has been finally filled. And I think this is a bad news for the North Korean regime, obviously. I think we know that Kim Jong-un is personally very allergic to the mentioning of the human rights concerns. And whenever the international community raises these human rights concerns, North Koreans have engaged in strong backlash. And then sometimes in a comical way, for instance, when a hair shop based in London, United Kingdom, made fun of Kim Jong-un, the North Korean diplomats showed up at the hair shop and protesting. So clearly, the regime is very sensitive to accusations of human rights violations, and which is all the more reasons why we should engage and focus on the North Korean human rights issues. But I think the reason why the Biden administration appointed a career diplomat, Julie Turner in this case, who's been working for the State Department for the past 16 years and many different areas, mostly in East Asian issues, but also as the democracy and human rights and labor issues, is because in contrast to the previous special envoy to North Korea, Ambassador Robert King, I think with Julie Turner, I think the Biden administration wants to have a much closer integration of the human rights issues with the Biden administration's other policies towards North Korea. So some people are going to claim that this represents the politicization of the human rights issues, because we'll probably see much more closer integration of human rights issues with the security issues and as well as the nuclear issues. And this means that I think it's going to put further hurdle over, put a higher bar for the North Korean regime to engage the rest of the world and engage in dialogue. And then I think North Koreans are going to probably see a nice compartmentalization of these issues away from the nuclear issues. But then I think the sanctions regime will reflect this. But then I think North Koreans will, in order to re-engage and re-enter the international community, will have to deliver not only a progress on the nuclear front, but also developments and progress on the human rights front as well. And so in that sense, I think the North Korean regime will feel much more burden and then pressure from the international community. And I think this is something that was wrong what we do, but at the same time, we have to expect and then also be prepared for backlashes from the regime. But overall, this represents a progress.
Right, progress, but we need to expect and deal with the backlash that might happen from Pyongyang. Now, Mr. Huevin, according to the report released by the Korea Development Institute, North Korea's foreign reserves did not go down much, although it had launched a variety of missiles last year, including the ICBM, which needs a lot of money. What significance do foreign currency reserves have to North Korea, and how is the reclusive regime managing to keep hold of them?
In order for that to understand, you always have to realize that North Korea has basically two different economies. You have the real economy, the people's economy, so to say, and there's the shadow economy, basically Kim's court involved with getting their hands on hard foreign currency. What we see in the real economy is that Kim Jong-un has doubled down on ending his experimental reforms of decentralization of markets. And he's now coming back to a more centralized economic control. And basically that has to do with the decision that he's going back to one of the oldest business models of North Korea in order to export goods and labor to their neighboring countries, China and Russia. And that's the way they get hard currency. So state control is particularly strong within these forms of trade, and that is the way they are keeping up their hard currency. But we have to realize as well that the ICBMs, the missile program, the nuclear program, they are not part of the real economy. They are a separate economy, and they are put in a very shadowy way where we have no idea, we have no telling on what is going on, what their funding is actually, what their funding actually is.
Right, so it is truly a dark area where we cannot really see into. Dr. Go, according to 38 North, the food security issue in North Korea is at its worst since 1990s. I mean, North Korea is not that kind of a stranger to food security issue, but still it says it's at its worst. Now, why so, and how is North Korea managing the agricultural sector?
So I think, as Mr. Hoovergan has pointed out, one major reason why the North Koreans are facing a major food crisis unseen since the 90s is because of the mismanagement of the economy. We know that as part of North Korea's return to the centralization of the economic planning, as announced in the last Party Congress back in 2021, North Korea has essentially tried to clamp down on the market activities. And by doing so, it also went after the private farmers who grow their own food from private plots and sell in the markets. So this was constituted a major contribution to the overall food production in North Korea because it represented more efficiency. And because they're going after that, and then that's another reason why the farmers are losing incentives to engage in private production. It reduces the overall food production in the country. Another reason is COVID. And then not just because the COVID represented some sort of a negative factor on the economic development, it's because with COVID, North Korea shut down the border with China. So something that not often discussed is the food smuggling element that stabilizes the food supply issues in North Korea. So if you look at the data, there's a high synchronization of the wholesale price of rice between China and North Korea. So if the food price goes up in China, the food price of rice goes up in North Korea as well, and vice versa. So and I think that this shows that the food supply from China has a very important role in stabilizing the market price in North Korea. But with the border closure due to COVID-19 preventive measures, this smuggling activities probably was actually suspended as well. So these two factors in contribution led to an overall decay in the food production. So I think this is something that the regime will have to reverse with new measures in the coming years, such as reopening the border trade with China, but also reverse those anti-market policies that they have implemented in the past 2 years. And that means, in a way, it represents a risk to the regime because the regime likes to extend the social control and the economic control in the North Korean society, but then they might have to reverse those measures, and that might actually lead to some unexpected phenomena, or like a demonstration, for instance, of people's anger that was pretty much clamped down in the last 2 years. So I think the regime is probably hesitant to do so. But then in order to face this food crisis, they'll have to engage in take some risk. That I think that's what is expected in the coming months.
Right, so North Korea should change a lot of economic policies and also should open the border with China. All right, that is all the time we have for today's edition, unfortunately. But thank you, Dr. Go and Mr. Hoovergan, as always, for your wonderful insights. We appreciate them.
My pleasure.
All right, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories on the issues happening in South Korea and, of course, around the globe. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.